Imagine a world where you can kill your child and get off scot-free. Well, as long as it's just an infant or a baby. Oh, wait, that might be legal soon in the state of Washington. Babies born alive after an attempted abortion could be left to die. This is why you cannot mess with the basic right to life. When you change the definition of when personhood is granted, you give way for evil to take root. It started with the babies in the womb, and now it's the babies after they've been born. Where does it go from there, right? Okay, let's dig into what long-term consequences will come of this and the deep moral implications of this new bill that Washington Democrats are pushing right now. But first, give us a rating and review. Let us know what you think. iTunes podcast, we really appreciate it, guys. Just hit that 5 stars. It takes just 5 seconds. Just write "great show," type it in. It helps the show blow up. We really appreciate it. Join us at the White Rose Resistance by going to thewhiterose.life, thewhiterose.life, and join at $35 a month. We call that an ally or air support. At $70 a month, and with that you get the book club. Come read books with me. I want to hang out live on Zoom with you. It's super fun. Help you better understand the culture so you can stand for life and be like a son of Issachar or a daughter of Issachar. And then you get your battle box in the mail and the White Rose app, and we've got a lot on there. We want you to join us and get mobilized and equipped, get fired up to take back the culture of life, okay? And help us and go subscribe at Rumble if you would, okay? In case YouTube ever gets rid of this show, we want to continue reaching people with the truth. We appreciate it. Let's get into it, guys. This is The Seth Gruber Show. You guys know that Democrats are down with killing infants, right? I think, doesn't everyone know this now? You know, we've done episodes long time ago on this show about how being pro-abortion inevitably, eventually, one day leads you to celebrate and support infanticide, the killing of babies after they're born. Some people have called this fourth trimester abortions. And you've heard about, you know, the left and the Democrats over the last few years vetoing, blocking the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act that Ben Sass originally co-sponsored back in like 2019 or something insane. And Pelosi and her demons just blocked that bill, I think, over 100 times at this point. You know, we've talked about bills that have used this phrase perinatal death, that we're going to prevent investigations into perinatal death. And you go, well, what the heck is perinatal death? And it refers to babies at a certain gestational age, but up to all the way to 28 days after birth. And you're like, why would you want to prevent investigations into babies who died within a month of being born? Wouldn't you want to see why that happened in case it was infanticide? Okay, so like you guys are aware of this. Like Democrats don't like babies, okay? And they're super chill with infanticide. Guess what? Washington State Democrats are pushing bills to kill infants, or just to encourage killing infants, or to say, we're not going to investigate people who kill infants. What is it about being a Democrat that always leads to baby killing? Washington Democrat legislators have sent to the governor's desk a bill to make it more difficult to investigate infanticide and sex trafficking. You freaking demons, you kooks, you evil, evil people. This is not Shock Jock podcast, okay? This is not red meat for the base. This is not Seth getting all carried away again, trying to rile people up. This is happening right now in the state of Washington. Senate Bill 5093, called Concerning Dignity and Pregnancy Loss, will repeal the crime of concealing a birth and removes death investigators' jurisdiction over stillbirths, abortions, and premature infant deaths unless there is serious suspicion of criminal activity, according to the Center Square. Now, Washington Democrats are crying and screaming and complaining about how a long-standing law in Washington is actually just anti-woman and anti-choice. So this Senate bill, substitute Senate bill 5093. You want to know why they call it substitute Senate bill? Because they're trying to substitute another law. So it's not a new innovative idea or law. It's trying to undo or remove from current existing Washington law something that's already there, which is there to protect the lives of infants and like literally like women being trafficked illegally by like pimps and sex traffickers. Okay. So Senate Democrats passed the bill 3019 on April 5th. Okay. And House Democrats followed suit in a 58-39 vote on April 9th after long floor debates. Republican Congress members proposed various amendments in the debate, and the Democrats rejected all of them. So let me just like tell you very clearly what is going on in Washington. The current law in Washington gives a lot of power and license to death investigators to investigate stillbirths, abortions, and premature infant deaths. Because sometimes there's malfeasance. Sometimes a baby doesn't die of natural causes, but is being abused or is killed by a parent. Okay? So it's important to have like a legal system and a criminal system and an investigation just to make sure that, hey, this baby died just from accidental natural causes and not from any bad will, okay? Like, this is pretty basic. Democrats have tried multiple times over the last 10 years in different state legislatures to remove some of this protection for babies and protection for women. You gotta wonder why. Why? Because they're actually down with infanticide. They're down with killing infants. Republican Jim Walsh from Aberdeen, Washington, proposed an amendment that would have enabled investigation if it appeared that the baby was alive at birth and no efforts were made to save his or her life. The Democrats shot down that amendment. Jim Walsh said that the bill overturns a Washington law prohibiting concealing a pregnancy so as to hide the causes of the baby's death. Another Republican, Brian Burnett, out of Wenatchee, Washington, called for amendments that would still allow for investigations in cases where sex trafficking is suspected. So Republican legislator Brian Burnett in Washington has an adopted daughter who's actually a survivor of sex trafficking. So this is personal for him. And he said, we should be doing everything in our power legislatively, public safety wise, federally, nationally, internationally, locally, to put a stop to this. It's so hard to get into the mind of people like this. Like, have you ever experienced this? Like when you see these kinds of laws, like, you know, the greatest example was like when they were like, let's put men in women's prisons who say they're ladies, right? It's like to get into the mind of Democrat legislators who are behind this kind of legislation, who think that this is a good idea, it's really difficult unless you understand that like there are like demonic powers and principalities and influences in the lives of people like this. This bill in Washington that apparently they're going to be sending to the governor Jay Inslee's death. No, it's not Jay Inslee anymore. I just forgot. That guy was a whack job. Bob Ferguson. They've got a worse governor in Washington now, by the way. Did you know that? Worse than Jay Inslee was. They're going to be sending this to Bob Ferguson's, the governor's desk to sign. And if he signs it, it will make it more difficult to investigate infanticide and sex trafficking. There's a great conservative talk radio host in Seattle named Jason Rantz, who's been speaking out against this bill. Isn't that a great last name to have as a radio rant? Rants. Going on rants, Jason Rantz described the bill as, quote, a state-sanctioned shield for traffickers, abusers, and anyone else looking to cover up a dead infant. Yikes. Powerfully put. Jason Rantz pointed out that the bill does not require anyone to attempt to help a baby who is born alive during an abortion or premature labor. Because of this bill, he said, no autopsy will be conducted, no criminal investigation, and no one is held accountable. So how does this work in the real world? If Washington Governor Ferguson signs this bill, then it means that in these cases where, let's say, a baby is born alive during the process of a botched abortion, which, by the way, we know has happened. Okay, we know that happens. I can give you an example in a second. but if you've been listening to this show and you're a high information voter like you are, you know that this has happened throughout the country. Oftentimes because there's not federal legislation that requires prosecution of abortionists or others who allow a born alive infant to die who should have been aborted in the womb, or they actively kill that infant. There's not any teeth to the federal protections for born alive infants that would scare the abortion industry into caring for and providing for infants who slipped out of the birth canal because they weren't killed in utero. And so if this becomes law in Washington, if a baby survives a abortion attempt and they're accidentally born, okay, and the abortionist or the doctors just kind of leave the baby on the table to die, or if they suffocate the baby right there, or they snip its spinal cord, like some abortionists have been known to do after birth, or they do something else that provides less evidence, either way, the bill makes it very difficult to investigate causes of infant death. So in other words, the baby it was a stillborn. It was stillborn. The baby was born already dead. And investigators, right, like police, like would be prevented from investigating what really happened. The only reason that you would want to make it more difficult to identify cases of infanticide or child killing is because you're down with infanticide and child killing. Because nothing in the current protections in Washington for infants actually curtail a woman's freedom to get an abortion. And we should have laws that completely remove your legal freedom to kill your unborn baby. But the point is that the law in Washington that the Democrats are trying to get rid of, it doesn't actually curtail her legal freedom to kill her baby in utero. It just provides good protections and powers of investigation for infants who die. And they want to get rid of that because they're demonic whack jobs that are down with fourth trimester abortions. Okay. It's hard to see a situation, unfortunately, in which Bob Ferguson does not sign this bill. So this is a call to all the Washington warriors, all the Washington believers, and the pro-family and pro-lifers and the bold pastors. Okay, Senate Bill 5093. Raise holy hell, raise a big stink, show up at the Capitol, okay? Scare Bob Ferguson vocally into not signing this bill. Guys, have you gotten your ticket yet for The Last Stand? Don't miss this one-day Christian festival for the remnant, for the warriors, okay, who know what time it is. We're talking about bold truth, unfiltered teaching, worship that rattles the gates of hell, and a generation rising up to resist the culture of death. This is resistance and reformation. Join me on June 21st in Southern California alongside some of the boldest voices in America, like Victor Marks and Riley Gaines and Lou Angle and David Harris Jr. and Alex Clark and Pastor Jack Hibbs. And we'll be worshiping with 10th Avenue North and Influence Worship and more, because this is more than an event, okay? It's a declaration. We need to give God a reason to bring revival. And we want to export it from California. So bring your friends, bring your family, bring your church. It's time to push back. It's time to rebuild. Go to thelaststand.com and get your ticket today. Okay, thelaststand.com. Use ticket Seth10, Seth10 for 10% off your order. And I'll see you on June 21st at The Last Stand. Okay. Jeez Louise. There's unfortunately a history in the pro-abortion movement of celebrating infanticide, actually. There's a long history of the pro-abortion movement moving towards the full affirmation and celebration of infanticide. You'll remember Kamala Harris's running mate, Tim Walz, remember the governor from Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin. Minnesota. Sorry, Governor Minnesota. He actually signed a bill that supported infanticide and the murder of infants. And we know from a state-level investigation that 5 or more babies who were born alive during botched abortions in Minnesota were left on the table to die under Tim Walz's watch as Minnesota governor. These babies were given comfort care, meaning let's make them comfortable as we allow them to die, instead of medical care to try to save their life. 3 other infants were born alive during abortions in 2019, which was Tim Walz's first year as governor, and they were allowed to perish and die on the table without life-saving care. The left and the Democrats decades ago really, really wanted partial birth abortions. It's one of the only good things that George W. Bush did, was to get rid of partial birth abortions, where you partially deliver a baby and snap their spinal cord, basically break their neck off, and then suction their brains out while their legs are flailing outside of the vaginal canal because you left the head in the vaginal canal. So it's a partially birthed abortion. Like, that's infanticide. That's actually what that is, right? They vetoed the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act like 100 times. And you've got folks like Peter Singer, who for decades have been saying being pro-choice means that you should support infanticide, because that infant is no more of a person than that thing was right before it slipped out of the vaginal canal. Like, the Democrats have a long history of being down with infanticide. So what's happening in Washington right now with the Democrats there trying to basically provide shield and cover for abortionists or doctors or women who might kill their freshly born infant by blocking investigations. That's not new either. And I this reminded me, because this news story is wild right now in Washington. It reminded me of something we talked about on this show 4 years ago, I think. And it's this article that was written in 2012 by a couple of psychopathic philosophers high off of their own intellectual flatulence, who published a piece in the Journal of Medical Ethics called After Birth Abortion. Yeah, that's right. In 2012, 2 philosophers, scientific, medical, bioethicist philosophers, published a piece called After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? That's the name of the article. That's the name of the journal. Okay, they published it in the Journal of Medical Ethics. Dr. Francesca Minerva, who's a research fellow at the University of Milan, and Dr. Alberto Gubellini, a senior research fellow at the University of Oxford Center for Practical Ethics. He has a PhD in philosophy, so he's really smart. So Dr. Minerva and Dr. Gubellini writes this piece called After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? This goes back to 2012. And their primary argument in their piece is they argue that the killing of newborn babies should be permitted, should be allowed in any situation where abortion is permitted, because there is essentially no difference between the fetus and the newborn. That's literally their argument. But wait a second. That's what pro-lifers say. Pro-lifers say there's no essential difference between the embryo, the fetus, and the infant. So therefore, let's protect all of them. They just flip that on its head and they go, these psychopathic leftist pro-aborts, which this now represents the direction of your Democrat Party, is to affirm the pro-life belief that there is no fundamental and there is no essential difference between the embryo, the fetus, and the newborn. But rather than taking those premises to then conclude that we should protect them, they take those premises and say, therefore, all of them are disqualified from personhood and none of them should be protected in our law and none of them have a right to life. Not a fetus, not an embryo, not a zygote, and not an infant. Oh, wow. So that's a little bit different than what we've been told is the normal position of pro-choicers, the normal position of the Democrat Party. Your run-of-the-mill pro-choice person out there in the culture might not be celebrating killing infants 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months after birth. But that is fundamentally the position of today's Democrat Party. Because when babies are born alive during a failed abortion and they slip out of the vaginal canal and now the only thing connecting them to mom is their umbilical cord and they are outside of the womb now, they are fully born. If a doctor kills that infant, your entire Democrat Party believes that that should be okay and that those doctors should not be prosecuted and that there should be no federal criminalizing punishment for those who do that. That's the truth. And the proof of that is they vetoed bills 100 times that would provide federal prosecution for people who actively kill infants who are born alive after a failed abortion. Meaning the Democrats aren't just saying, protect women's rights to get abortions. They're saying, protect abortionists and mothers who kill infants. But like what I'm saying is like, this has been being talked about and celebrated and pushed forward for some time now. This 2012 article called After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? Here's what they say in this piece. I'm going to read you some pieces from this. They say, we propose to call this practice after birth abortion rather than infanticide. To emphasize that the main moral status of the individual killed is comparable with that of a fetus. Therefore, we claim that killing a newborn should be ethically permissible in all the circumstances where abortion would be permissible. These are direct lines from this article in the Journal of Medical Ethics from 2012 by Francesca Minerva and Alberto Gubellini, PhDs, called After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? They say the moral status of an infant is equivalent to that of a fetus in the sense that they all lack properties that justify the attribution of a right to life to an individual. Both a fetus and a newborn certainly are human beings and potential persons, but neither is actually a person in the sense of a subjective moral right to life. We take the term person to mean an individual who is capable of attributing to her own existence some basic value, such that being deprived of this existence represents a loss to her. Let me paraphrase that. If you can't value your right to life and you're not in a cognitive state to be able to appreciate that you have a right to life, then you actually don't have any right to life whatsoever, and therefore you're not a person. They say this means that many non-human animals and mentally retarded human individuals are persons, but that all the individuals who are not in the condition of attributing any value to their own existence are actually not persons. Listen to this line. Merely being human is not in itself a reason for ascribing someone a right to life. Oh my gosh, you sick freaks. Merely being human is not in itself a reason for ascribing someone a right to life. You hear that? Being human is not enough to have human rights. This is what many leftist academics, PhD philosophers teaching at our Ivy Leagues and most of our universities today actually believe. That they get to determine which humans qualify for the status of personhood. Your like historical like blinkers, like warning lights ought to be going off like crazy right now. This bill they're pushing in Washington to say, you know, well, let's stop these investigations into like infanticide. Let's not empower like lawmakers and police investigators to determine if like dead babies happened naturally or if they were actively killed. Let's not look into that. Okay, like this affirmation of infanticide won't stop with infanticide, just like the affirmation of abortion didn't stop with abortion. If a government can deny the right to life to an entire class of human beings, then there's no reason why they can't deny that right to life to another class of human beings. If we don't have the right to life in virtue of being human, then no one has an objective right to life in virtue of being human. That right has to now be based on something other than being human. But being human is the only thing we all have in common. So if we don't have a right to life, objectively, recognized by the government and protected as such, then those rights are now subjective and they're based on something we don't all have in common, that we don't all share equally. So now the government has to decide the litmus test and the criteria for who are persons and who are not. That's how damaging this one admission is from these psychopathic philosophers and doctors publishing at the Journal of Medical Ethics when they say merely being human is not in itself a reason for ascribing someone a right to life. Here is their essential case. And like, why is this important again? Because the ideas that start in the universities and in the medical journals and in the philosophical and bioethics journals that the professors shaping the minds of your children end up reading, like the ideas that start in the ivory towers never stay in the ivory towers. You understand this, okay? Never scoff at or take too lightly the overinflated egos and flatulent, stupid, random, and minority positions of the elite, because they inevitably don't remain the minority positions of the elite. They end up becoming the orthodoxy of the next generation that you sometimes pay 50 grand a year for your students to go be, your children to go be indoctrinated with. Like that's why it's so important to know what's going on in the universities and the ivory towers, because those ideas inevitably trickle down and they start to become the worldview of the next generation. Like universities are like cultural crystal globes, right? They tell you what your culture and country will look like in 15 or 20 years. So that, like this case that we talked about 4 years ago on the show, this article, I wanted to bring it back up again because this is what's driving Democrats in Washington to be like, woo, infanticide. Here's the essential case in this article called Afterbirth Abortion. Here's what they say. If we were to break down their case, premise one, neither the fetus or the newborn is an actual person, but each is a potential person in virtue of being biologically human. Premise two, an actual person is someone with a serious right to life. Premise three, to have a serious right to life, you must value your existence. Premise four, fetuses and newborns do not value their existence, and therefore they are not actual persons, but only potential persons. Premise five, the interests of actual persons override the interests of potential persons. So conclusion, therefore, abortion and infanticide are both morally permissible when in the interests of actual persons. That's like basically the case in their article. To be harmed by abortion or infanticide, you must be an actual person. And an actual person is an individual capable of desiring the different situation they'd be in had they not been harmed. But this requires the mental development necessary to have desires in the first place. But the fetus and newborn fail that test, thus they are not harmed if they are killed, because only real persons can be harmed. I know, you're like, man, these guys are high off of their own fumes. I know, but the ideas are no less dangerous because of it. So yes, you might be harmed now as a person if your mother abused you with drugs during pregnancy, but you were not harmed then when you were a fetus in the womb. So there was no you present in the utero to harm because you were not a person, only a potential one. It's like, wow. That's why you're seeing people going back to Ralph Northam in 2019 when he was the governor of Virginia, when he was talking about making a baby comfortable after they're born, talking about what they do with it, leaving it on the steel cold table, deciding whether to let it live or not. That's why Peter Singer's been saying for decades, we have to be okay with killing infants up to 1 year old. Many philosophers have been saying this. And now after decades of these kinds of articles, of these kinds of ideas, now the Democrat Party is like, when you try to pass like federal protections for infants who might be killed after birth, they're like veto, 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 veto. Like there are consequences, okay, for the culture and for our politics when bad, dangerous ideas are left unchecked. And that's what's happened. That's what's happened in this case. That's why this Senate Bill 5093 is happening right now in Washington. They're merely walking down the path that their intellectual activist forebears have laid before them for about 30 or 40 years. This is why Dr. Nancy Pearcey says, like worldviews have consequences. People tend to work out the logic of their worldview. They tend to live out the implications of their worldview, even if they aren't aware of the worldviews that they've assumed, right? Because there's an internal consistency to ideas and worldviews. They might be dumb, dangerous, stupid worldviews, but there's still an internal consistency to them. And when you say that the baby can be killed in the womb through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason or no reason at all because they're not a person. Well, why are unborn babies not persons? Well, because they don't have the mental faculties and cognitive abilities that we say one is a person. But nothing fundamentally is different from that 3rd trimester baby to that infant right after birth, which is why Peter Singer's like, kill them both. But now, one political party is starting to now like apply the internal logical consistency of pro-choice to infanticide in law. Ideas have consequences. This view that's espoused in this article called Afterbirth Abortion, the view that they're forwarding is called the mental continuity view. It goes like this. It says that you are not the same being today that you were in your embryonic, fetal, and newborn stages. The mental continuity view says that though your biological life began at conception, what matters is mental continuity, not biological continuity. Mental life, not merely bodily life, is what defines you as a person with rights. So put simply, the real you is not your body, but your conceptions, thoughts, and memories. That's what is the person. And since mental continuity does not stretch back to the embryonic, fetal, and newborn stages, because none of us remember that stage of our life, then you are not the same being today as the one conceived by your parents. Thus, a person is a being that has awareness of his or her existence over time and in different places with the capacity for wants and plans for the future. If you are a human incapable of these traits, you are not a person. And this is why Peter Singer in his book Practical Ethics said the embryo, the later fetus, and the profoundly intellectually disabled child, even the newborn infant, are all indisputably members of the species Homo sapiens, but none of them are self-aware. None of them have a sense of the future or a capacity to relate to others, so they are not persons. Like these views were being espoused a long time. Singer wrote Practical Ethics, I believe in 1990 or 91, possibly 92, right around there. And the mental continuity view says, in order to be harmed, you must be capable of experiencing harm. But to experience harm, you must first exist as a person. And to exist as a person, you must first value your existence. And as a fetus or newborn, you were not capable of valuing your existence. Thus, you did not exist when you were a fetus or a newborn. And therefore, abortion or infanticide would never have harmed you because there was no you there. That's what connects the pro-choice support of abortion with the left's support of infanticide. It all goes together. It actually makes sense to kill infants if you believe unborn babies aren't persons. Like that one leads right into the next one, if you know what I'm saying. So what's wrong with this argument and with the argument in this article? Just a few points. Okay. Maybe like a few responses for you. Because guess what? This is going to become more normal. Our good friend and brother at White Rose, AJ Hurley, we just posted a reel on White Rose Instagram account. You can go check it out just recently of this guy screaming at AJ saying, it's a human life, but it's not a human. It's a human life from the moment of conception, but it's not a human yet. And you're like, do you hear yourself? You sound so stupid. But that's actually what that very foolish, very misinformed man was trying to say was the mental continuity view. That biologically it has human DNA, but it's not a person and doesn't have value or dignity yet because it can't value its own existence. The child isn't aware of itself. And that's how they define what a person is. So what did I tell you a few minutes ago? That there's an internal consistency and connective tissue between killing babies in the womb and killing them outside the womb. And that if you're consistent, you should actually champion both. Because the less view of personhood, their extrapolation, their conception of personhood, that definitionally excludes the unborn, would also definitionally exclude the infant from rights of personhood and a right to life. What I'm telling you is that worldview, that conception of personhood that animates the support of killing unborn babies and infants will also lead to killing others as well. It will never stop at merely killing the unborn and infants, is what I'm actually trying to tell you and warn you about. What's going on in Washington right now with trying to protect those who would kill infants by preventing investigations into the deaths of infants will eventually lead to something darker and sinister. That's right. What I'm saying is that most of the evils in our society, we can probably trace back to the initial approval and celebration of killing babies in the womb, because it was never going to stop there. Okay? How do we respond to this? What's wrong with this argument? In Francesca Minerva and Alberto Gubellini's article, After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? What's wrong with their conception of personhood? And how would this lead to killing a lot more people than just infants and unborn babies? These ideas must never be left unchecked. But first, we'd like to thank our friends at Every Life Diaper Company for sponsoring The Seth Gruber Show. You guys know that you got to get your baby stuff from people who actually like babies. Your diapers, your wipes, your baby shampoos and washes. It's all non-toxic, don't worry, make America healthy again. You got to get this stuff from people who don't want to slaughter the unborn. I could not believe it when I learned from my friends, they're dear friends. I trust them. You should trust them too. At Every Life, when they told me a few years ago that almost every major baby brand, diaper company brand in America was rhetorically supporting or financially supporting abortion. They were mourning the overturning of Roe versus Wade. They were paying their employees to go to blue states to get abortions. You're like, wait, what? I thought you guys created stuff for babies. Don't you want more babies? Sick whack jobs. But not our friends at Every Life. They're incredible. Go to everylife.com, promo code Seth10, Seth10, to get your baby diapers, wipes, and baby materials from a pro-life, pro-family, pro-America, anti-woke company. That's how we're going to defund woke corporations that hate you and your values. Stop giving them your money. Everylife.com, promo code Seth10 for 10% off your first order, and let them know that we sent you. Put in that Seth10, okay? That supports us here at the Seth Gruber Show and the White Rose Resistance. This is easy, guys. Fight with your wallets. Go to everylife.com. Well, first, why should we even assume or grant the premise that there's such a thing as a human that's not a person? Right? I explained to you the mental continuity view and the primary case they're making in this article, which is that being human is not enough for ascribing someone a right to life. That you can have human biology, but have no rights and not be a person. Why should we even grant in the first place that there are human non-persons? That entire belief is a outgrowth of body self-dualism, that the real you is not your body. But body self-dualism is completely counterintuitive, because you'd have to say my body existed before I did. You'd have to say you never hugged your mother, because persons are not bodies. So your mother is not a body. She's an intangible soul or consciousness that you can't see or touch. So you've actually never hugged your mother. What weird things you have to say if you grant this dualism between the body and the self, which drives this whole support of abortion, right? Because they're like, well, you have a human body and human DNA, but you're not a person. Well, why should we grant that in the first place? As I've said before, this means that psychiatrists who cure multiple personality disorder would be guilty of mass homicide. Body self-dualism cannot account for or explain human equality, Because if personhood and the right to life is based on desires, emotions, and consciousness, and humans don't share consciousness, desires, self-awareness equally, then those who have a greater self-awareness or a greater sense of consciousness would have a greater right to life and a greater sense of personhood than those with less, and human equality is destroyed. Secondly, why must I value my existence before it's wrong to kill me? All right, let's ask that question. Remember what the mental continuity view says. In order to be harmed, you must be capable of experiencing harm. But to experience harm, you must first exist as a person. And to exist as a person, you must value your existence. But as a fetus or newborn, you did not value your existence. And therefore, if you're killed through abortion or infanticide, you weren't harmed because there was no you there. But why should I must first value my existence before it's wrong to kill me? Why is valuing my existence a value-giving trait in the first place? 2-year-olds do not value their existence. 1-year-olds do not value their existence. Severely cognitively disabled Alzheimer patients may not value their existence. Can we kill them? No. The answer is no. You can still be harmed. You can still be wronged. You can still be denied of something you have a right to, even if you're not cognizant of the fact that you exist, even if you don't value your existence in that moment. Thirdly, why must I experience harm in order to be harmed? Remember that they say that to experience harm, you must first exist as a person, and to exist as a person, you must value your existence. But why must I experience harm in order to be harmed? Are there cases where you could be harmed or wronged without experiencing the harm? Yeah, if you slit my throat while I'm under anesthesia, I will not experience hurt, but I've still been harmed. The instantaneous murder of an adult that was painless and unanticipated. If a semi-truck hit you head on and you died instantaneously, you got hit so hard head on by a semi-truck that the second your head was collided with, you died instantaneously without any pain. If someone did that to you intentionally, the instantaneous murder of such an adult, I guess, would not be wrong because the victim did not experience her death as harm. Wait, that sounds wrong. That sounds twisted. I think we'd say that you were still harmed, even if you weren't capable of experiencing the harm, if you didn't experience the harm yourself. See all the things wrong with these kinds of ideas? How about this one? Why assume that killing a human being is wrong only because the victim values or desires their continued existence? Remember, this is like fundamental to the pro-choice position. It's that you have to desire to go on living. You have to have a sense of self or a sense of self-awareness wherein you know you exist, you value your existence, and you want to continue to exist. This is like maybe one of the most fundamental pro-abortion arguments. They say that the unborn doesn't know they're being killed. They're not self-aware. They don't even desire a right to life. They're not even aware of themselves yet. So they don't desire to continue existing. So therefore, killing them is not wrong. It's this idea that if you don't have a desire for something, then you don't have a right to that thing. So if you don't desire a right to life or desire to go on living, then you actually don't have a right to go on living. And that's how they defend killing babies in the womb. It's also what animates these people in their defense of infanticide, because they would say neither does the infant desire a right to life or to go on living. But is that really the best way to conceive of what a person is and what harm is and what wrongdoing is? Let's see. Suicidal people don't desire to go on living. But if you murder them, it's still wrong. The severely depressed who have no desire to go on living would still have a right to life. How about cult members who are brainwashed into killing themselves? You've heard of some of these stories, right? They may not desire their continued existence, but they still have a right to life and they're still persons. Why should we even grant this belief from these psychopathic authors at the Journal of Medical Ethics that it's only wrong to kill a human being if they value their continued existence? We just gave you cases of how that same ideology or assumption could totally be used to justify killing people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. It's never just constrained to killing the unborn and infants. If any class of human beings can be entirely denied a right to life, then any other class of human beings could entirely be denied a right to life. Okay, like those who murder the unborn cannot be trusted to govern the born. And those who murder the unborn and the freshly born infants will one day murder you too, if you get in the way of their political project, if you pose a threat to their regime. If the unborn is unwanted because they disrupt the lifestyle choices of their parents, then you could be labeled unwanted and a burden as well. Yeah, what many pro-life people, I think in the pro-life movement and pro-life Christians don't understand is that like when we're fighting against abortion, we're actually not just fighting against abortion. We're fighting for like everyone's right to live. In 1973, the term human from person were ripped apart. And being human was no longer enough to have human rights. Oh, that's right. What was that line from these psychopathic authors? Merely being human is not in itself a reason for ascribing someone a right to life. If they can deny unborn human babies and born human infants a right to life, they can deny it to you as well. And they will, and they have. So we're actually like standing on the natural right to life of every human being. And by challenging and undoing and reverse engineering the abortion ideology and movement, we're safeguarding everyone else's right to life as well. This is why Abraham Lincoln said, in giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free. We could paraphrase Lincoln today and say, in giving life to the preborn, we assure life to the born. Lastly, I just want to point out one other like stupid problem with this argument and with this article that animates the left's and the Democrat Party's support of infanticide today is why should we assume that I cannot be wronged unless I am harmed? Right? They say that you're not wronged if you don't experience harm. And you can't experience harm unless you're capable of valuing your existence. And to value your existence, you have to have the cognitive abilities of self-awareness and desires or whatever. Okay. But why should we grant that you cannot be wronged unless you're harmed? Think about this. A failed assassination attempt harms no one, but the victim is still wronged. A failed assassination attempt, right? So someone tries to murder you. Someone pays an assassin to try to murder you, but it fails. You're still alive, and you don't even know that someone just tried to kill you. Are you still wronged? Yeah. But did you experience any harm? No. So you can be wronged even if you didn't experience harm. Like, this is so basic. But of course, being pro-abortion rots the brain. Leftism rots the brain. It makes you stupid. But stupid people are dangerous. And the stupid people who wrote this article, After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live, are very dangerous. Let me tell you their names again. Dr. Francesca Minerva and Dr. Alberto Gubellini. They wrote this in 2012. Peter Singer was celebrating similar ideas in the early 1990s when I was born. And now, multiple state governments around the country, primarily right now in the state of Washington, leftist Democrats are being like, maybe if you kill an infant, we shouldn't investigate. Maybe if infants die, we shouldn't even look into why the infant died. So, if it was like a sex trafficker who killed the infant of one of their traffickers who had a baby, or just some psychopathic mother who kills her infant and smothers the baby to death, let's, whatever. Who knows the cause of why that happened? Like, if this bill gets signed, it's going to lead to more cases of infanticide. And if it's not stopped there, where will it stop? Huh? It makes me think of a paraphrase of Martin Niemöller's famous words, First they came for the socialists, and then they came for the trade unionists, and then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak up, I did not speak up, I did not speak up, and then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up for me, right? Dr. Mildred Jefferson said, today it is the unborn child. Tomorrow it is likely to be the elderly or those who are incurably ill. Who knows but that a little later it might be anyone who has political and moral views that do not fit into the new distorted order. I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe the reason we've been pretending that we don't know what women are is because we've been pretending for 50 years that we don't know what babies are. Like, unless we get back in touch with objective, eternal truths that every human being for basically all of human history knew to be true and was willing to stand by and defend, then everything else is up for grabs. And if unborn babies and infants can be killed, why not Granny? Why not you when you're on anesthesia? Why not you if the left designs some technology like we talked about in the show recently to just turn off your neural capacity and your sense of self-awareness? Oh, now that they're not persons, like there's lots of strange things that begin to happen and very dangerous things for a society and a republic and the family as we know it when we don't ground and base the right to life of every human being on the fact that they're merely human beings. And that as image bearers of God, human beings have a dignity and right to life that no other species or form of life has. And it's only by grounding that right to life and the protections therein on our shared human nature, which we had at the moment of conception, that we can guarantee human rights and protections for all human beings. But those eternal truths have been being attacked for a long, long time. They'll actually always be attacked. And that's why Christians and the Church of Jesus Christ must be the institution that stands up against those evils and safeguards protections for the voiceless, the vulnerable, the young. That's our job description. The fight against life has been happening since Calvary, really before. Who else is going to stand in the gap? We need you. We need the church in all areas of influence in our society. The academy, the marketplace, the church, the courts, the clergy, entertainment, Hollywood, everywhere. Because these ideas are not going away. And even a 4-year Trump presidency is not going to get rid of these ideas from the republic. They're going to have to be challenged. They're going to have to be destroyed. They're going to have to be rebutted. And they're going to have to be stood against by good people who understand that our value and our dignity do not come from how we function, on how we look, on how smart we are, but on what we are. Human beings created in the image of God. Go tell Washington State Democrats where to stick this bill. Raise holy hell. Okay? Washington, man. A lot of kooky stuff going on up there, but there's good people there. There's good churches there. I've been to a lot of them. Substitute Senate Bill 5093. We're warning you now on the Seth Gruber Show that Washington Democrats are moving towards infanticide. What are you going to do about it? Until next time, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is the Seth Gruber Show.